But the fact that we've got Mr. Diak being questioned suggests that there's a bit of an issue. I think with regard more generally to the fact that I guess other sports folks were aware of this, it's not a shock, and maybe that's the sad bit about it, is that it hasn't come as a shock, but the scale of it certainly has. It's definitely, in terms of the future, the things I think the sport's got to look at is some kind of a root and branch external review of some of the governance that goes on around the sport. I think there's an argument for potentially resourcing WADA better than it has been in the past. You might even need to think about some kind of coalition of the willing among the pharmaceutical bodies out there to try and get ahead of the curve. But ultimately what's required is a root and branch culture change, and as you know, that doesn't happen quickly or overnight. So you've almost got to deconstruct it all to hopefully have it survive that deconstruction and then be constructed on a different footing. I'm not sure how easy that's going to be able to do.
We saw Paula Radcliffe in the report just there. She's also been talking about the work that urgently needs to be done. So let's listen to what she has to say now.
It now needs to be taken forward in such a way that we can start restoring that faith in athletics, restoring that right of every athlete to know that they are competing on a level playing field and that fingers aren't going to be pointed at their performance and that the people they're competing against are all clean.
So she alludes to the credibility there, the restoring the faith in athletics again. What must athletes out there like Paula Radcliffe and ones that are currently competing be thinking now? Are they questioning all the results that have been going on for the last however many years?
They must be, and a lot of them at the time that the performances were happening were actually suggesting, I'm not quite sure that I was beaten by somebody clean. But I think this kind of drip feed of episodes that we've had, you can take it back to, I guess, Ben Johnson, and then there's a period of time nothing happens. That's not enough. It's got to be almost a big explosion, because the slight kind of death by 1,000 cuts approach isn't going to be sustainable. It actually mentions it's going to be an absolute uprooting of all of it. Everyone that's in play has got to come to the party and be honest, and then say, right, are we serious about starting on a clean slate? Because now people don't actually believe what they're watching anymore, and that's probably the most damning thing for the sport.
Really interesting point you make there. Who do you think needs to have more of the lead in terms of where the reform needs to happen? Is it the Russian Federation or is it the IAAF, who've also come in for a lot of criticism from this report?
I think both. The Russian Federation sound as though they're talking in a conciliatory fashion, aren't they, today? Obviously, we had the initial blanket denial of what's going on. I think the IAAF, certainly as the custodians of the sport, have really got to probably allow for an external mirror to be held up towards it, to review it, and accept some external challenge. So I'd say both have got to do it, but there might be other nations not yet in the picture who also might need to come to the discussion, and that could be where it gets worse before it gets better.
We'll wait and watch. Ernest, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, with me in the studio again is our commentator today, Ernest Opuni. Ernest, so let's talk about David Moyes now. It's been a bit of a fall from grace from the dizzy heights of Manchester United for him, hasn't it? When we look at his record, I mean, it's not bad, is it? He's done well with Everton, relatively okay. He wasn't successful with Manchester United, but he wasn't a complete failure, you could argue, in the eyes of many. Brought a lot of players to the team. What's gone wrong for him in La Liga? Because he started off quite well, didn't he?
He did. I mean, on reflection, I was wondering whether it was the right sort of move for him. I suppose some of his, I guess, building from the back, the defensive style, would appear to have been quite a good fit. I think the difficulty for him was that whilst we had an opinion of him and he had a reputation here which would have bought him time in the Premier League, he was going into a completely different space, a league that was unfamiliar, and he probably wasn't going to have the impact as quickly as was going to be expected if he was going to actually survive. The move makes sense, though, if you think about it. As you say, if you lose a job at Manchester United and go to another Premier League team, with the ones that would have been available, it would have looked like an automatic step down. So perhaps actually taking a sideways step into Spain may have worked. I think it makes it easier for him to re-enter and not have the pressure of having to come to a top club. No?
And is that his next move, potentially, then? A move back to England, potentially the Premier League?
I think potentially so. I mean, I've been reading about 4 clubs, but I probably won't mention them because it feels like bad form because all of them have currently got incumbent managers. However, I was thinking, you know, would a Fulham, they're recruiting, would that be a possibility? QPR are in a bit of state of flux. I don't think the arrangement at the moment is meant to be permanent with Neil Warnock. Potentially, with those sort of resources, he could build his way back up. That would make sense, rather than coming back at the top under the same pressure that he left United at.
And no doubt the education from a foreign league away from England. Many English managers don't necessarily go to a league like La Liga or the German league or the Serie A in Italy. I mean, it surely must pay dividends for his CV and stuff that he's learnt over the last year.
It should do. I mean, look at the way in which someone like Terry Venables was transformed by the time he spent away in Spain. And you would like to think that there, you know, no one wants to lose their job, but there has been a lesson learned over 12 months he probably wouldn't have learned here, and maybe that's going to benefit him for the future. I do hope for his own sake that he gets into a settled place and has a chance to rebuild.
Let's move on to Samuel Eto'o now, who is in Ghana and Sierra Leone to promote a health initiative on behalf of FIFA. How important is it that stars like Eto'o can reach out and use their celebrity status and their iconic status, especially within their home countries, to promote initiatives like this?
I suppose it's because of... I mean, I'm of Ghanaian extraction, so I know what Eto'o means in Ghana. And for him to actually use his celebrity in that sort of fashion is absolutely fantastic from my standpoint. He's probably demonstrating that actually sometimes real leadership is demonstrated in the places you wouldn't necessarily look towards. And some of the real leaders in nations in Africa right across the piece could look towards him actually and look at the example. But I mean, fantastic reach. He's reached something like 20,000 students with this public health initiative. It's a real lesson for a lot of folks, and hats off to him for doing it.
And you look at players like Didier Drogba, who've done that over the years. It sort of sets an example really for how players should act, really, shouldn't they?
It is. I mean, I suppose the premium is placed quite high on them. You would start and say, actually, national governments should probably be taking the lead on that. But if players do actually make a fortune and want to put something back into their communities, hats off to them. Hats off to them.
Very quickly, Brazil-Argentina this week. Who do you fancy to win this one?
On paper, you would imagine that Brazil are set a bit better. At least they're coming off a win in their last game. Argentina look vulnerable. They've got the likes of Messi not there, Agüero's not around, and they've had a bad loss at home already to Ecuador. I think Argentina would probably take a draw. Brazil potentially would be stronger favourites of the two to actually get a win out of it.
And is it a surprise to you to not see these two at the top of the rankings within the FIFA charts? I mean, Belgium are number 1, aren't they? We were just talking about it now, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, the FIFA charts are an interesting thing, aren't they, Gavin, really? Because I suppose the performances that are taken into account and aggregated could make the odd team that happens to do really well look a lot better than they actually are. I suppose it's when the tournament comes around that you really see the cream rise to the top.
Ernest, thank you very much indeed. A pleasure to have you on, as always. It's a joy. That is it from us, from this edition of Global Sports Report here on Arise News. Thanks very much for watching. We will see you again at the same time tomorrow. Take care. Have a good day.